Welcome back to Ultimate Reddit Drama. We're incredibly grateful for your support before we begin. Today's tale, tell us which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience now. Let's dive into today's story. The silence of the night was much lighter than the storm raging inside my heart. The ticking of the bedroom clock felt like an echo of my beating heart. My wife, whom I loved with all my heart, sat in front of me, but her eyes no longer had the warmth that it once was. I had always seen him as an honest and devoted fellow. But now, the truth that was in front of me shook my whole world. Sherry probably thought I wouldn't understand her moves. He assumed that I was either stupid or careless enough to ignore his growing closeness. She felt that I would tolerate her affair like people endure the hazy memories of an old relationship. But she had no idea how long I'd been noticing her changing behavior. Her excuse to stay late in the office, her sudden desire to change her looks, and her lack of interest in the moments she spent with me. I tried to talk to him directly, but each time he laughed off my worries or accused me of doubting me. He had heard his explanations so many times that they had no breath left. Once I was convinced that she would never tell the truth herself, I hired a private investigator. I had to know the truth, no matter how bitter it was. As I sat in Jake Sloan's office, my heart was filled with a strange kind of uneasiness. He said, "Your wife has not done anything wrong yet, but it is difficult to say that it will be like this for long." The only thing that was echoing in my mind was, "I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to do it." She reported that my wife and her partner Todd had started calling themselves working spouses. I got angry when I heard this. My wife had only one husband, me. Sherry and Todd used to have lunch together every day. They sat together, held hands, and even lightly kissed each other whenever no one was watching. Jake showed me several photos of the two of them sitting together outside the office, in a parking lot, or in a restaurant. My heart rate quickened. I clenched my fists angrily. Todd's wife was out of town. She was going to her mother for the next 3 days. In the meantime, my wife and Todd saw the opportunity. They were planning to spend the whole night together in a hotel. But their problem was that I was at home and how to remove me without suspecting me. He made many plans. At first, she thought she would tell me that she was going on a girls' trip, but she was afraid that I might ask her friend and lie would be caught. Then he asked me to go on a golf trip with friends. But when I refused, Todd suggested a new plan, plain and clear. Todd was convinced that I was such a weak husband that I would allow my wife to sleep with someone else. He explained to her that if she told him, I would probably get angry, but then I would agree. According to him, it will be good for our relationship. And my wife, whom I once thought was wise, believed this stupid thing. I told the investigator to keep an eye on every single message from Sherry. I wanted to know when she was going to confess all this to me. On Friday, Sloan called me and told me that Sherry was going to talk to me on Monday. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. It was time for me to end this game. Monday had arrived. There was a strange peace in my mind, but there was also a simmer inside. I did my day's work just like I did every day. I went to the office, had a few meetings, but I was focused on one thing all the time. I was going to hear my wife's truth this evening. At 5:27 p.m., I parked my car in the garage. I hurried into the house and kept myself in composure. I took out a glass of wine for myself and put one of his favorite wines on the table. If she was going to speak to me frankly, I was also going to respond to her with full preparation. After a while, the key to the door turned around and Sherry came in. He had a nervous smile on his face. I knew she was nervous, but she was sure that she would get her word done today. She put her purse and keys on the table and sat down in front of me. "Hi, sweetheart," I said with a smile. She was a little uncomfortable, probably because she didn't expect me to be in such a good mood. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "Yes, absolutely." "You have something to tell me today, don't you?" He looked into my eyes for a second and then nodded. "Yes. Actually, I think we should talk about this openly." "Absolutely," I said and filled her glass. She became a little more nervous. I was watching his every expression. His hands were trembling slightly. His breathing was a little faster. I hope you don't get angry with me, but I want us to try something new. Something that can strengthen our relationship. I listened to him without batting an eyelid. What's new? She took a deep breath and began to speak. I want us to have some freedom in our relationship. Meaning, we should allow each other to explore. It would just be like trying something new, and I was thinking, this Friday I can spend a night with Todd. The room suddenly seemed very cold. I didn't say anything for a second. I looked into his eyes, and there I saw not embarrassment, but hope. Hoping that I would obey him. So, you mean you're saying in front of me that you want to sleep with another man, and I approve of it? He looked at me, with some hesitation, then nodded. Yes, it's just a one-time thing, and it will be good for our relationship. I took a deep breath and laughed. Do you really think I'll accept it? She was shocked. Perhaps he expected me to get angry, but my laughter frightened him. What happened? He asked softly. I pointed to the folder on the table. What's in it? Open it and see. He slowly picked up the folder and opened it. The color of his face faded. Inside were photos of her and Todd's lunch, of them holding hands, of them kissing in the parking lot. Attached to all this was the report of a private investigator, which revealed every lie he had deposed. His lips trembled. When did you do all this? Don't ask me how long I've been doing it. Just understand that I knew this day would come, and I had already made my preparations. Tears welled up in her eyes. You didn't have to do it, I'm just what, Sherry? Just wanted to turn me into a cheated man? Did you really think I'd let you sleep with another man and still keep you as my wife? He bowed his head. You misunderstand me. I just wanted something new to come into our relationship. New? I said in a cold voice. What made you think I'd be a part of this plan of you and Todd? No, it was Todd's idea, but I thought, I don't know, I was stupid. Yes, she was an idiot, I said as I slowly pulled out the divorce papers from my pocket. Divorce? Yes, you heard. I can't stand all this, and I can't keep you with me anymore. She was terrified. No, Alex, please, I don't want us to be apart. Oh, don't you want now? And you didn't think of it when you were thinking of going to bed with Todd? He looked at me, but this time there was only fear in his eyes. Please. I'm sorry. I took a deep breath and got closer to him. Sherry. I looked into her eyes. You have lost me. She was completely shattered. Tears began to fall from her eyes, but now it was too late. I put the divorce papers in front of him. Sign by Friday. And yes, tell Todd that his plan failed miserably. She couldn't say anything. I pulled my chair back and walked out of the house. From today, I was free. Sherry had tears in her eyes, but now these tears meant nothing to me. The woman I once thought was my world was the one who burned my world to ashes. The silence in the room was so heavy that every sob of it hit my chest like a hammer, but I could no longer feel pain. I was lost somewhere within me, where there was no emotion left. I had divorce papers in my hand, which I put on the table. Her fingers trembled and touched the papers, as if she were touching reality, and only now did she realize what she had lost. Alex, please, give me a chance. I didn't want that to happen. It's just done. Her voice was broken, but I couldn't stand that false innocence anymore. I looked at her coldly and took a deep breath and said, What did you think, Sherry? Will I forget everything? That I will assume that it just happened? I pulled the chair back and stood up gently. You haven't just betrayed me. You've made fun of my love. You've trampled on our relationship. And now you want me to give you another chance? There was a coldness in my voice, but somewhere inside there was a storm. He looked at me, his eyes wet now. I know I've made a big mistake, but I really wanted us to be happy. Todd made me think it would be good for our relationship. She was still trying to escape, still trying to put the blame on others. I smiled, but the smile was venomous. So you mean to say that you didn't do it on your own conscience? That you didn't have a chance to think about what you were going to do? I took a deep breath and stood right in front of him. The truth is, Sherry, that you chose it. You ruined our relationship with your own hands. And now, I can't forgive you now. She sobbed. But Alex, we're a family. We have a son. Won't you think about that? I took a deep breath and averted my gaze. When did you think of him, Sherry? I said in a low but sharp voice. When you were going on lunch dates with Todd? When were you planning to spend the night with him in a hotel room? You didn't remember our son then, but now that you're alone, you suddenly remember him? She had more tears in her eyes, but I wasn't going to melt anymore. I gently slid the divorce papers towards her. Sign these, Sherry, and get out of here with your luggage by tomorrow morning. Alex, don't do it. His voice was trembling. I have no other choice, I said in a cold voice. You chose it with your own hands. Now it is your responsibility to suffer this decision. There was silence in the room again. She was looking at the papers, as if even touching them would burn her. But it was no longer in his hands. Now the decision was mine alone, and I had made my decision. The night was dark, but for me, it was even darker. Sitting in the corner of the room, I was trying to piece together the scattered clippings of my whole life. There were divorce papers on the table, which Sherry had not yet signed. My fists were clenched, my eyes were dry, but my heart was broken inside. I didn't know if there was still pain in me, but I was sure that I wasn't going to let any weakness enter my life. My phone was constantly vibrating. My sister's calls, my mother's messages, but I didn't want to talk to anyone. Suddenly, there was a slight knock on the door. I slowly got up and walked to the door. It was Sherry. There was a mixture of fear and pain on his face, but I didn't care about him anymore. He looked at me and then said softly, Can we sit down and talk to each other? Without saying a word, I opened the door and stepped aside. She came in and just stood there, as if she didn't know what to say. I gave him a chance to speak, but he didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then her voice trembled. Alex, I know what I've done is unforgivable, but I really want you to understand that I never wanted to leave you. I laughed, a bitter laugh. Didn't you want to leave? I repeated. So was it all your way of expressing love in some other way? There was poison in my voice, but I kept myself calm. I felt alone, she said softly. And the solution was for you to sleep with Todd? I said in a cold voice. Tears began to drip from her eyes, but now I didn't mind those tears. You ignored me, Alex. We were never the same. I tried to talk to you, but you avoided it every time. I took a deep breath. Is this your defense? That you cheated because I ignored you? I only once. His voice was broken. Once? I looked at him. Now there was fire in my eyes. Does the cheating subside from a bar, Sherry? Does one time mean that everything will be all right? He bowed his head. I know I made a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. You chose it, Sherry. You did all this knowing that I will never forgive him. There was deep silence in the room. She was sobbing, but now her tears could not melt my heart. I pulled up the chair and sat right in front of it. I'm not going to give you another chance. Leave this house by tomorrow morning. And this was our last dialogue. He looked at me, the last glimmer of hope in his eyes. But I was no longer the man who loved her before. And yes, I said coldly, you will soon realize what you have lost. But until then, this door will be closed to you forever. There was only the sound of her soft sobs in the room. But I had no feelings left in me. The silence of the night was far calmer than the deep turmoil within me. Sitting in the corner of the room, I was rolling an empty glass between my fingers. The alcohol was gone, but the pain was still there. After Sherry left, the house seemed strangely empty. The place where his laughter once resounded, today, there was a strange silence. But the silence was comforting to me. The phone screen was constantly burning out. My sister's calls, my mother's messages, but I didn't want to talk to anyone. I picked up the phone and looked. The mother wrote, "Son, we can all be wrong, but family is never apart. You don't need me, but I need you." I was annoyed. He left me alone when I needed him. When I was betrayed, no one supported me. And now, when I'm trying to reconcile myself, they all want to push me into the same pain again. I tossed the phone aside and got up and went to the balcony. It was raining lightly outside. The cold air hit the face, but the heat inside did not subside. Then the doorbell rang. I took a deep breath and walked to the door. When I opened the door, my eyes narrowed when I saw the man standing in front of me. "What are you doing here?" I asked in a cold voice. Todd stood, the same Todd who did everything to my wife. There was no remorse in his eyes. "Can we talk?" he said in a low voice. I should have been angry. I should have slammed him right there at the door. But I stayed calm. "What to talk about?" I asked, not letting any emotion come into my voice. "Look, Alex." He took a deep breath. "I know what I did was wrong, but it was just a mistake. We both never wanted it to get to this point." I laughed, a cold, merciless laugh. "Mistake?" I said, looking into his eyes. "Are you calling something that's been going on for a year a mistake?" He fell silent. Then he bowed his head. "I just wish we could leave this thing behind. I don't love Sherry. It was just a phase. We were both confused, and we both did something that shouldn't have happened." "So now you want me to forget everything?" I asked coldly. "Yes," he said immediately. My fists tightened, but I kept myself calm. "Todd," I said softly, "if you think I can forgive you, you're even more foolish than I am." He raised his head, his eyes twinkling. "I gave you everything. I trusted my wife, and you strangled my trust in my own house. And now you're standing here and asking me to forget it?" He opened his mouth to say something, but I stopped him with a raised hand. "Get out of my life forever. If I see you in front of me again, I don't know how much I'll be able to control my anger." Todd stared at me for a few seconds, then nodded slowly and turned away without saying a word. I closed the door. The room was still shrouded in silence, but this time the silence was a little different. I picked up the phone and texted my lawyer. "The divorce process has to be expedited." The answer came immediately. "I understand. The papers are ready." I put the phone back on the table and took a deep breath. Now I had no reason to look back. There was only one way to move forward. The next morning's light was peeking in through the window, but there was no light inside me. I couldn't sleep the whole night. Everything that had happened in the past few days was playing through my mind over and over again, like some old bad tape. Sherry's infidelity, Todd's guts, Mom's betrayal, and now their pretense that everything can be fixed. I looked at my son's room. He was still asleep. Seeing her innocent face filled my heart with pain. He wasn't part of the mess, but he was still bearing the brunt of it. I had made up my mind. I would get him out of this environment. I got a notification on my phone. "Lawyer, can you come sign the papers at 3 p.m. today?" I immediately replied, "Yes. The divorce process will begin today. I will put an end to this toxic relationship." Then there was a knock on the door again. I got a wrinkle on my forehead. Who would have come in the morning? I opened the door and my blood froze when I saw the man standing in front of me. My mother. Son. His voice was trembling. We have to talk. I looked at them with cold eyes. What about now, Mom? There was no emotion in my voice. Can I come in? He asked in a soft voice. I thought for a few seconds, then stepped aside. She came in and stood in the living room, as if this house had now become a stranger to her. Sit down, I said. She slowly sat down on the sofa. There was an awkward silence in the room. I know you're angry with me, she said softly. I laughed bitterly and said, Angry? Mom, it's more than anger. This is betrayal. He rolled his eyes. I never wanted all of this to happen, he said in a low voice. Then why didn't you do anything? Because, she paused, because he was your brother. Something broke inside of me. My brother was more important to you and I was nothing? I asked in a cold voice. That's not the point, son, he said, tears in his eyes. I didn't want the family to break up. Family? I said bitterly. Mom, this family was over the day you cheated on me. She started sobbing. I know I did it wrong, but I wish we could fix it. Okay? I clapped my hands. How? Should I be with my brother again, as if nothing had happened? Shall I bring my wife back and pretend she didn't cheat on me? No, she spoke softly. It's just that we become family again. I took a deep breath. Mom, I can't forgive you. Maybe I'll do it sometime, but not now. There was sadness in her eyes, but she understood that this time I was not going to bow down. She stood up slowly. I will always pray for you, son, she said. Your prayers have done me a great deal of good so far, I said with a cold laugh. She looked me in the eye and then slowly moved towards the door. The door opened and then closed. The room was once again plunged into silence. I took a deep breath and went to the balcony. The story didn't end here. It was just a new beginning. On the other side of town, Todd was walking out of his wife's house. There was a strange tension on his face. He knew that I had exposed his truth. His wife had thrown him out of the house, and he was now homeless. I had heard that he was staying in the hotel for a few days, but he did not have much money. Well done. Now he will know what the price of betrayal is. His laughter still echoed in my mind when he assured Sherry that I would accept the relationship. He won't do anything, baby, he said. He's very straightforward. If you explain it to him correctly, he will let you go with me. My fists clenched when I heard him say this. I knew I couldn't leave him like this. I was determined to teach him a lesson. Now it was time to strike the last blow. In the evening, I was sitting in my lawyer's office. So, have you made a final decision? The lawyer asked. I nodded. Yes, I want Sherry not only to get a divorce, but to divide our entire estate in such a way that both she and Todd will get a lesson. The lawyer listened to me attentively. You know that during a divorce, if you can prove that he betrayed you, you can kick him out completely? That's what I want, I said in a cold voice. All right, the lawyer said with a smile. I will fight this case in such a way that you not only get your property in full, but you also do not have to give any kind of spousal support. And my son's custody? The lawyer flipped through some papers and said, if you can show that he doesn't live well with Sherry, you can get custody, especially if the toad is still cruising around. I was now convinced that I was on the right track. It wasn't just my retribution. It was my judgment. The next day, Sherry came to see me. Are you really going to do this? He said in a trembling voice. I looked into his eyes. What am I going to do? I asked coldly. Your intention is to completely ruin me. Did you think that I would let you and your lover be happy by entrusting everything? There was fear in his eyes. Alex, I know I made a mistake, but please, for our son. Absolutely, And so I can't leave him with you. I cut him off. She took a step back. You can't do that. I'm done. I put the divorce papers in her hand. From now on, you're just my son's mother, nothing more. She was trembling. I opened the door and pointed to him. Go now, and the next time you think of cheating on someone, remember how much you had to lose. She stared at me with tearful eyes, then slowly walked out. The door closed. There was silence in the room. But this time, the silence was comforting. For the first time, I felt that I was free. The cold night breeze was coming in through the window, but it was nothing compared to the storm that was blowing within me. I was sitting in my living room, with a glass of whiskey in hand, and my eyes fixed on the door. Sherry had just left here, defeated, broken. But the remorse on his face wasn't enough for me. I thought that when this day would come, I would feel relieved. But somewhere inside, there was a strange uneasiness. My wife had cheated on me. My family was almost shattered, and I had even taught her a lesson. But still, why wasn't I satisfied? The phone rang. I looked at the screen. Todd. My eyebrows were furrowed. Why was this bastard calling now? I took a deep breath and picked up the call. What do you want? My voice was as cold as ice. Congratulations, Alex. Heard her soft, poisonous laugh from the other side. You'll be happy to win, won't you? My jaw clenched. Get straight to the point, Todd. You've ruined me, buddy. My wife fired me, I've lost my job, and now Sherry is left alone because of you. Because of you, Todd. It's all the result of your actions. He took a deep breath. Maybe. But you didn't notice a thing, Alex. And what is that? What effect will this have on your son? My heart stopped for a moment. If you really love him, don't you think he should be allowed to be with his mother? I clenched my fists. Don't teach me about my son, Todd. I know what's right for him. Oh, sure, he laughed. But did you think that when he grows up, what will he know? He would realize how cruel his father was, that he devastated his mother and took her away from him. A wave of anger ran through me. You're still playing the game, aren't you? I said. You still think I'm going to be weak. I don't care, Alex. His voice had deepened now. But remember one thing. If you think the story is over, you're making a big mistake. I will be back. And when I return, it won't be good for you. The phone was disconnected. There was deep silence in the room. But now the silence was making me uneasy. The next few days, I was focused on my son. I wanted him to stay as far away from this whole drama as I could. But then, something strange started to happen. At first, I had the feeling that someone was following me. Every time I returned home from work, I felt like someone was following my car. Once, when I went to pick up my son from school, I saw a black car parked on the other side of the road. Someone was sitting inside it, but I couldn't see his face. Then, strange things started happening outside the house. One night when I was going to sleep, there was a loud knock on my door. I opened the door, but there was no one outside. There was only wind, and somewhere in the distance, the headlights of a car were slowly disappearing. A few days later, I received a letter. There was no sender's name. It was written on a piece of white paper. I said, the story isn't over yet. I got goosebumps. Todd. He was still playing the game, but this time, I was ready. This time, I was waiting for him. The night was deep, but for me, it was nothing short of an endless darkness. My fingers were tightening, and many questions were arising in my mind. Will I be able to save my son from this trap? Was Todd really going to take any serious steps? That night, I stayed up late. I checked my gun, locked all the doors, and kept an eye on the camera feed. But nothing happened. Everything was quiet for a few days, but I knew it was just the calm before the storm. And then, finally, that moment has arrived. It was Saturday night. I was sitting in the living room with my son when suddenly the alarm went off. I quickly glanced at the screen. There was a buzz in the backyard. My heart started pounding. I quickly picked up my gun and slowly opened the back door. I saw something moving in the darkness. "Who's there?" I said in a cold voice. There was no response. I stepped forward. The gun was held tightly in both hands. At that very moment, suddenly, there was a sound of footsteps from behind. I turned around and pointed my gun, and there was Todd. He had the same hideous smile on his face, but this time there was something else in his eyes. Madness. "You really think you won?" he said in a low voice. I took a deep breath. "Todd, just do it now. You have already lost everything." He shook his head. "No, Alex, I can still ruin your life." Then he pulled something out, a knife. My body went into alert mode. "What are you going to do?" "There's only one thing you need, Alex," he continued. "Just get your son out of my way." "I don't need that. But you, I want to erase you." My blood boiled. "Forget about my son, Todd. Otherwise, I will take you to a place from which you will never be able to return." He laughed. "Oh, threatening? Good to hear. It's not a threat. It's a promise." I pointed the gun at him. "If you go away from here and you show up again around my son or my house, your consequences will be what you cannot imagine." He stared at me for a few seconds. Then the smile on his face faded. "You win, Alex," she said softly. "But remember, people like you always think they won." Then he stepped back, disappearing into the darkness. I took a deep breath. But I knew. The story was now over. The next morning, I called the police. Todd was no longer a threat to me. He had gone into hiding somewhere and probably won't come back into my life. But it didn't matter to me, because that night, when I peeped into my son's room and saw him sleeping, I realized this was my real victory. My life was starting all over again.